Hello and welcome to Post to Post, the channel where we discuss all things hockey and all teams. I'm Jason. I found out yesterday that my buddy Neil is feeling a little under the weather, so he said it's probably going to be a couple days before he puts out another video just because he's not feeling so well. And actually yesterday morning I sent him a text and I said, I just heard a story and I want to talk about it, I want to make a video about it. And then I found out he wasn't feeling too good. So last night I actually filmed a video of me talking about this topic I'm about to talk about. And I got a tip out there for all you YouTubers who are very amateur like me, or, I mean, no one's like me. No one's as bad as this, but don't drink a big glass of Tang orange juice and then come downstairs and film a video, because you get this big orange stain around your mouth that I didn't know was there. So I spent all this time making this video, went upstairs to put it up in the computer and edit it, and wow, it was useless. So it's actually a good thing that happened, because I was doing a little more research today and I've clarified a few things I wasn't sure of in the other video. But this is still a topic that's well over my head. So as you can see in the title, I'm here to talk about, are player trades going to be taxed now? Because right now, obviously, they are not in any league that's in North America. If a GM of one team wants to trade a player from another team or with another team, they make the trade, and if they both like what's happening on both sides, the trade goes through, and that's pretty much all there is to it. But that's changing. So before I get into that, I'm going to give a little bit of the backstory. I'll try not to make this video too long, but I just want to provide a little bit of information, because if you guys know from last year when we first started doing this channel, I really enjoy the business side of sports. So when I heard this conversation, it piqued my interest, and it's very unclear what direction this is going to go. So I'm definitely going to be following it. It definitely could have an extreme effect on how player trades are done in all leagues in North America, not just the NHL. So it's one of the issues that the league's not sure how it's going to be done or is handled. The teams aren't going to be sure. I don't even know if the IRS knows how they're going to handle it yet. So this video is very early on, like extremely early on. But so let's just start from the beginning. So in 1967, the IRS determined that when two different professional sports teams, like in the same league, trade players, that is considered a lifetime exchange, a 1031 lifetime exchange, and the 1031 is just the code for the legal document. So because it's a player being traded for another player, it's considered a lifetime exchange, and that made it exempt from being taxed. And it was very controversial when it first came in. Accountants and lawyers and people like that were saying that this doesn't really seem like the right way that the law should be written, because no other organization other than professional sports team can trade contracts and not pay tax on them. Professional sports teams were the only ones that were getting by that, using it as a loophole. But obviously it didn't stick. This went in 67, and up until the beginning of this year, that's how things have been. But in December, down in the States, they launched the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Sorry, I muffled that big time. Basically, it was their budget the Trump administration put in December, and now it is live as of January 1 of 2018. And in that kind of huge document of tax changes, they actually modified the 1031 clause that all sports teams in North America have been using. And the 1031 law also applied to, it wasn't just put in for sports teams. I should have mentioned that earlier. If you were like a farmer, you could say you have a piece of heavy machinery that you don't need anymore. Say you have this tractor, and another farmer, across the street has a different piece of machinery that you could use, and you two decide to do a formal trade. So you're going to trade this tractor for this piece of farm equipment. You make the trade, and you didn't have to pay tax on it because it was considered the 1031 lifetime exchange. You're going to own that tractor or that piece of farm equipment forever until you decide you don't want it anymore. So it wasn't just for hockey players, but it was for other things as well. The change that was made in December with the new tax laws make it so that the 1031 exchange only applies to real estate now. So if you own a piece of property and you want to trade it for another piece of property, you can exchange those properties and not have to pay capital gains tax on the value of the property. So say you have a property and Joe Smith has a property and you trade and yours is worth more, his is worth more than yours, you don't have to pay capital gains tax on that based on the 1031 lifetime exchange, to my knowledge right now as of the new law. But that means, like, for example, my farmer example, they can no longer swap equipment and not have to pay capital gains tax on it. So if the farmer trades his tractor for another piece of equipment and that other piece of equipment is worth more than his tractor, he has to pay the gains tax on that because he now is worth more than he was prior to making the trade. And long story short, or big circle coming around, this now affects player trades in all leagues in North America. So before, when you made, let's say, a hockey trade, you traded a player for picks, you traded a player for another player and picks. It was all completely hockey related. Now, depending on which side of the trade you're on, if you trade contracts and end up getting more value back than you traded for or traded away, you now have to pay a capital gains tax of 21% on the value you gained from that trade. And I know it's a little bit confusing. It's confusing to me. There's a lot of little details, and there's tons of them, and people are trying to figure out a whole bunch of different things of how are they going to do this, how are they going to do that. And one comment that was made that I was reading about was, how do you determine what a player contract is worth, or a player is worth? Let's say you take Joe Smith. Joe Smith's here. And I go to GMA and I say, hey, GMA, what do you think Joe Smith's worth? And he gives me an answer. He says, based on what our scouts say, based on what we need for our team, I'd say that this guy would be worth this much to our team. Go to a different GM, ask what Joe Smith's worth. You're probably going to get a different answer. And you're probably going to get tons of different answers based on asking all 31 GMs in the league. And that's just hockey. So what one person's perception of what a player worth is not the same as what another person is. So how do you make a trade between two people that value the player differently and then pay a tax on that value when you can't put into writing what that player is worth in a way? So some people were saying that it may have to be the value remaining on the contract. So that opens up a whole can of worms, and I'm not sure if that's the direction they're going. So you don't necessarily have to pay tax on what's remaining on the contract. So say, I owe this guy $1 million left on his contract. You don't necessarily pay that 21% tax on that contract. You're paying the 21% on what you gain back in the trade. So if you had, say you're making a trade worth, $30 million in players and assets and contracts, and you trade it to this team, and you're getting back somehow, they figure it out, you're getting back $35 million. So you wouldn't pay the 21% on the 35, you'd pay the 21% on the 5 you're getting back, because you're gaining supposedly a 5 million more net worth, or whatever the correct language is. So basically you were worth 5 million more now with the trade, you got to pay 21% tax on that trade. So it's going to make things really difficult when you're trading what hockey people considered to be a very expensive or highly desired prospect for a player that's in the league with a contract. Because if you have someone that's just up and coming and they're on an entry-level deal, they're not worth very much. They're worth the $700,000, $800,000, whatever the entry-level contract is. Even if you're trading it for just a Joe Schmo third, fourth liner, he could be making $2 or $3 million a year, and he could have a $5 million or a 5-year contract. He could be worth $10 million. This guy here on his entry level could be 2 or 3 years on a $700,000, $800,000. There's a huge discrepancy there. So if you somehow were able to make that trade, which would be crazy, you would have to pay. So not only would you be giving up the phenom or the up and comer that could be crazy, you're giving that to the other team, but then you're getting an average player back, but then you're paying 21% tax on a huge chunk of that guy's deal or contract because he's not worth the same as this young guy. So the actual skill of the player has nothing to do with how much tax you pay based on the trade, because it can't work like that, because each GM or each party involved in the trade is gonna value a player differently. So you can't have a law where the value is subjective or it changes. It has to be black and white. this is how you determine player worth. And from what I've been reading today, really the only tangible way of doing this is to have it be the remainder of a contract. So I want to give an example here. Dion Phaneuf was traded from Toronto to Ottawa in 2016, and he had about $40 million owed left on his contract. So I think it was $7 million a year and X amount of years. So depending on, I can't remember the exact trades. I know it was a huge trade involving a bunch of people, but depending on what you gave up to get Dion Phaneuf, if maybe you gave up picks, maybe you gave up whatever, but like, I'm not doing this as a straight example. I'm just saying this is Dion Phaneuf worth $40 million. If you gave up, let's just say you gave up picks and, you know, a draft pick and whatever, how do you value the picks and the draft picks, right? Dion Phaneuf is owed $40 million. So you're going to give up picks and drafts, which are nothing right now. So they'd have to come to some sort of agreement with what a pick and what a prospect would be worth, or how just a base fee. But either way, it's not going to be anywhere near $40 million. So say you gave up those picks, you took Dion Phaneuf, he's owed $40 million more in his contract. You're going to be paying 21% tax onto Dion Phaneuf's contract of whatever the difference is between him and the value of these prospects and picks. And that, to me, is going to make trading a lot more difficult, because when you get players that sign those bad contracts where they're overpaid and they're too long and you know, they go into their later years where they're not as effective, it's going to make it almost impossible to move those guys now. So like, I don't know if I can't remember what was given up to get Dion Phaneuf, but I don't know if that trade would happen now, because it's just, it's more than just the hockey. It's 21%. It's a fifth of the contract that you would have to pay out if what you are giving up in return is not that much. So, and it's not just going to affect hockey. It's going to affect NBA. It's going to affect NFL. It's going to affect all sports teams in America, because it's a new tax law in America. So some people have been asking if Canada would be exempt, because, you know, we're Canadians. We don't follow those laws. But the answer to that is all the teams are franchises of the NHL, and the NHL is in New York, or it's based out of New York. So all of the tax laws that are in where the company is located in New York apply to the franchisees in a way. So all teams would be affected by this. So it doesn't matter that if you're a Canadian team or an American team, you're going to get hit by this one way or another. And another thing people have been asking was, well, maybe the NHL could just act as one entity instead of having these companies being their own businesses. So, for example, you'd say the NHL is one entity with all of its teams, and the trades that occur between teams are just internal trading. So they shouldn't be, they shouldn't apply to that capital gains tax. The problem with this is the NFL tried to do that, and it went to court and it was shot down. They tried to say, we are one entity, all the teams are within the one entity, and they said, nope, each of these teams is its own business, they are their own entities, and it was shot down. So that's not an option either. So unless something comes out where professional athlete contracts get some sort of amendment to this law, it's just going to be black and white. You pay 21% capital gains tax on the additional worth that you're gaining back in a trade. So if you're losing, then obviously you don't have to pay, because that's a loss, which means the other team is gaining. And it's very subjective, like I said, because how do you determine the worth of a player and have everyone agree on it? It has to be something that everyone agrees on, because it's taxed. And I don't think they're going to have this law go through in a way where the GMs can just fudge the numbers so that every trade ends up working out perfectly and, you know, it's equal value on both sides. So someone's going to pay somewhere, and hockey trades are already hard enough to do as it is. So this just seems like something that could get in the way and make things even harder, and we'll see less trades than we do, because, you know, if you're a GM and you're considering taking on a player who has, you know, an expensive contract, you got to find out if what you're giving up in assets is worth it. You got to find out if the fit is right for your team. But now you also have to figure out how much tax it's going to cost you just in cash from the company side to acquire that player. Because if you, like I said, if you're not giving, a large amount of value of contracts up to get that player, it's 21% of whatever gain you're getting. And, depending on the contract, like some of these contracts pay a lot of money. They're done over a long period of time. We've got players making almost $100 million. So it's significant money. And this is an interesting story. It's something I'm definitely going to follow. I don't think Neil's talked about it yet. I think he's just been under the weather. But maybe in the podcast, when they do the podcast on the weekend, Brent and Neil can talk about it and give their thoughts, because I'm definitely interested to see what people have to say. I'm by no means a tax law person or accountant or lawyer. This is just the basic understanding I have. If you can clarify it a bit more, feel free to post in the comments. If you have an opinion about this, feel free to post in the comments. But it's just fascinating that, you have this league where, good trades come by very rarely, and now this is thrown in. And I don't even think it was intentional. I think it was just an oversight. And now everyone's scrambling, from the league, from the IRS, from, everywhere. And the law is in effect now. It took place January 1st, 2018. So it applies now. So people have to figure out what this means for their team, what this means for the leagues, how the tax is going to work. And it's just another expense that teams are going to have when making trades, potentially, if they gain. So that's basically all I wanted to say. I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen. And like I said, maybe Neil and Brent can touch upon it on the podcast. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.